So here is my presentation on adaptations of the body 2.4, and it is done by me, obviously. So we're going to start off by establishing different types of training and how they can bring different training adaptations. I have chosen the sport that is football to talk about due to the players playing it being considered as games players, and because there are always times during a game where you will have to work aerobically and anaerobically. So during football, you are either walking, jogging or sprinting. Ideally, footballers would use the time that they are walking as their recovery time, so we'll leave that part out. Now, an example of a moment when someone in football may be jogging is when the centre-backs are jogging to the halfway line to push the whole defence or maybe even the whole team up the field. This is considered as aerobic due to not performing at a high intensity. It's lasting for a relatively long time due to not running quickly, and also you're using oxygen. Some players may struggle with this part due to lack of fitness or lack of training. In order for this to be done perfectly, you need to create yourself a training program. Now, people sometimes struggle with the definition of what a training program is. So, what is a training program? Well, a training program is a program which consists of instructions designed to improve a person's performance for a certain sport or a certain skill. Now, whenever making a training program, you must apply the FITT principle to make it as efficient as possible. Now, FITT stands for frequency, intensity, type, and time. Applying this principle would not only make it efficient, but you'll also be organizing your time. The frequency in FITT just means how often you'll train. Intensity part just means how hard you'll train. The type part is referring to whether the training is either aerobic or anaerobic, and the time part indicates how long each of your training sessions will last. In this case scenario, you would want to jog from your 18-yard box on a football pitch to the halfway line and back. Do this repetitively to the halfway line and back. And do this for a set amount of time. Now, we have to apply the FITT principle to this activity by going through them one by one. Frequency. You'd want to do this exercise 3 times a week. Intensity, submaximal, because you'll be jogging, so 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate would be good. Type is obviously aerobic because it's lasting for a long time at submaximal intensity, and also you're using oxygen. Time, for your first session, do this for 10 minutes, then add in progressions after each session. For example, you add 5 minutes on after each session. Now, an example of a moment when someone in football may be sprinting is when a defender sprints as fast as they can in order to tackle their opposition that's also sprinting towards the defender's goal. An ideal training session for someone who wants to increase their speed would be fartlek training. This type of training is appropriate for any footballer because it relates to the game's demands. You're sprinting between specific areas and you'll be using your walking time as recovery. Again, you would need to apply the FITT principle to this. So let's go through this one by one. Frequency. Again, this exercise ideally should be done for 3 times a week. Intensity. You will be working to your maximal effort, so you'll be working to 100% of your maximum heart rate. Type. During the recovery stage, you're walking. You'll be using the aerobic system to get your muscles recovering. During the sprints, you'll be using no oxygen, therefore you'll be using your anaerobic system to complete the sprint. And time. For your first session, do 10 stages of sprinting and 10 stages of walking. After each session, add in another 5 more stages for each part for progression. Now, in this first part of the section, I'll be going through the aerobic adaptations to every system. So we're going to start off with the CV system adaptations. So aerobic training can positively affect your cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system consists of your heart, and by training aerobically for at least 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, the cardiovascular system can improve in many ways. This benefits the centre back because they will be jogging and walking a lot more during football games, meaning endurance is vital in a football game. Now, as you can see, I've included a VO2 max graph, and it consists of pre and post training. So as you can see, as the line for pre-training goes up, it stops halfway through, and that just shows that that is the maximum amount of oxygen the player can take in. And as you can see from post-training, it goes up and surpasses the blue line. So that just shows that with aerobic training, your VO2 max also increases. As you start regularly training aerobically, the muscular walls of your heart start to increase in thickness, especially the left ventricle. This means more blood would be able to enter the ventricle, or simply just known as an increase in ventricular filling. An athlete's heart would be a lot bigger in comparison to a regular person's heart due to consistent training taking place for these changes to take place. Due to cardiac hypertrophy taking place, this automatically means that the left ventricle will stretch more and will be allowed to fill with more blood. This means that the stroke volume increases and a higher amount of blood will travel around the body. Because your stroke volume increases, your heart rate will start to decrease due to your heart not needing to contract as much to meet the demands of the exercise. If your heart rate was high, then that means that your ventricles will consist of very little amount of blood, and your heart would need to contract a lot in order to match the amount of blood going around the body when you have a low heart rate, and your ventricles would fill with a lot of blood. Now, as you can see, I've included a graph here, and it is the pre and post training of training cardiovascularly, and it just shows the effect on what happens with your stroke volume. So as you can see, your stroke volume for the pre-training person would just start to like plateau at a very soon a time, but as you can see, post-training, it starts to go up and surpass the blue line and start to like keep gradually increasing, not even plateauing. It just keeps gradually increasing. So that shows that aerobic training can increase your stroke volume over time. So as you can see, I've included a heart rate graph here of pre and post training. So let's go through it. So as you can see, the blue line, which is pre-training, which represents pre-training, it goes up, it goes up, it goes up. It surpasses the red line, which is post-training, and it plateaus at a higher time. Okay, that just shows that heart rate is higher pre-training. But post-training, as you can see, it goes up, it goes up, it goes up, and the red line is underneath the blue line, and then it plateaus at a lower time. And this just proves my point earlier when I said aerobic training or regular aerobic training will decrease heart rate. So what does frequent aerobic training do to your cardiac output? So if all these adaptations slowly started to take place, when calculating your cardiac output, you'll realize that your cardiac output will increase significantly. This is all due to an increase in stroke volume from cardiac hypertrophy. Now obviously, when cardiac output increases, a greater oxygen supply will be in place, and also waste removal would be greater and take place quicker. But as all the changes in the heart take place, capillarization also takes place. Capillarization just means the density of your capillaries will increase. This means more oxygen will be delivered to your working muscles and more CO2 is removed from contraction of muscles, or if you'd just like to simplify this whole process of capillarization, you could just easily say diffusion rate increases. Now, as you train aerobically, the volume of your red blood cells increases, and this means a larger volume of oxygen can be attached to each red blood cell. This also means a larger volume of oxygen is delivered to your working muscles. This is all due to red blood cells carrying a larger volume of oxygen. Blood volume increases due to plasma volume increasing due to plasma protein volumes increasing as well. Remember, 90% of plasma is just water, and the rest of it is just sodium ions. These increasing in volume means that your blood volume also increases. So, although we have covered the fact that aerobic training improves your body physically for sport, it also reduces the chance of certain cardiovascular diseases like CHD, coronary heart disease, arteriosclerosis, and arteriosclerosis, and hypertension. So let's go through them one by one. So, coronary heart disease. This is a type of disease where waxy substances called plaque builds up inside the coronary arteries. This will decrease blood flow through the coronary arteries. As we've mentioned before, the volume of your blood increases. So with that taking place, the blood would be able to flatten the waxy substance onto the surface of the coronary arteries and clear up the way to increase blood flow, blood through that blood vessel. Now, arteriosclerosis. This is a type of disease where walls of your arteries thicken and harden. Now, as soon as some people hear the effects of this disease, they'll think, oh wait, thicker walls and harder walls will result in stronger contraction. In this case, no it's not. Your arteries need to have a high elasticity, and in order to do that, they can't be hard. The arteries need elastic walls to do pumping, elastic walls to do the pumping up the heart and against gravity. If they are harder, the blood will not reach the top of the heart and the blood won't be delivered around the body. Now in this section, I'll be going through the adaptations of the respiratory system that will be enhanced due to regular aerobic training. Over time, you'll start to realize that you're breathing a lot more during exercise and your breaths are more deep. This shows an increase in pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation is the process of air flowing into the lungs during inspiration and out of the lungs during expiration. This is helpful because sometimes when people normally breathe during exercise, the air reaches the middle of the trachea and comes back out. This results in the gases not being exchanged and the CO2 levels in the body to not only remain constant but also increase. The CO2 levels rising will start to make you fatigue. So by pulmonary ventilation increasing, you're ideally delaying fatigue and you'll be able to perform longer. On a VO2 max graph, the line will start to plateau at a later time, and this indicates the O2 capacity in your lungs also increases. Now, as I've mentioned before earlier on, breathing will occur more during exercise as you become fitter, and this results in an increase in breathing rate. An increase in breathing rate would mean your body would become more capable of taking in oxygen and getting rid of CO2. Due to repetitively inspiring and expiring from training, your respiratory system will start to adapt itself to become more efficient. The respiratory muscles become stronger and stronger after every training session. This will result in a stronger contraction from your external intercostal muscles, and your internal intercostal muscles will relax more and more. The higher the degree of contraction of external intercostal muscles, the higher degree of relaxation of your internal intercostal muscles. And that means the greater the volume of your air is inspired. As sessions go by, resting lung volume, or also known as tidal volume, increases. This means that your body starts to become more capable of taking in a larger volume of air per breath, which results in more gaseous exchange taking place to get rid of the CO2 in the body. The rate of gaseous exchange will increase over time due to number of capillaries per area of muscle tissue increasing. And as we know from previous assignments, capillaries are the main site of gaseous exchange. An increase in the number of capillaries also increases oxygen supply to the muscles. On the first training days, you will need a long recovery phase due to your body not being properly adapted yet. As you continue training, you will start to realize that the recovery phase starts to decrease, which also means your EPOC, also known as excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, size will decrease. This will be the first sign that you're becoming aerobically fitter. Now, as we all know, exercise in general is healthy for us. Training aerobically can reduce the chances of certain respiratory diseases, for example, COPD, also known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This is a condition that makes it difficult for you to empty air out of the lungs because your airway has been narrowed. This disease can be caused by obesity, smoking, genetics, or just in general lack of exercise. So now we move on to the neuromuscular system and the skeletal system. So how are slow oxidative fibers adapted over time with aerobic exercise? So the slow oxidative fibers will start to become more resistant to fatigue, and this means the aerobic performer will be able to perform for a longer amount of time. And then this also means that means the aerobic performer, which in this case is a footballer, would be able to keep running for a longer amount of time, keep sprinting for a longer amount. Actually, no, not sprinting. This is aerobic. Apologies there. Okay. And also the number of mitochondria increases, which improves the body to produce energy. The more mitochondria you have, the larger the amount of energy your body will be able to produce, and produce energy, meaning you'll exercise for harder and longer. Now, how can aerobic training bring skeletal benefits? How does this affect performance? So, just aerobic training would create stronger ligaments. Now, without ligaments, joint will be very unstable. So, with regular exercise, ligaments will become more stronger and more resistant to injury because you're constantly contracting them when you're aerobically exercising. Now, another adaptation that will take place is an increase in synovial fluid. Now, synovial fluid is produced by the synovial membrane, and it is produced during exercise. Now, this stops cartilages from drying out, which keeps them lubricated. Now, sometimes when your cartilages are dry, they'll become dry, and whenever you move or contract, you'll feel an ache in your joints. Now, this is bad for any aerobic performer. That means it will restrict their movement. So, as we start to train aerobically, the number of our aerobic enzymes increase, which also means the number and size of our mitochondria also increases. This enhances the ability of our slow twitch muscle fibers to create ATP. This also allows athletes to perform at a submaximal intensity throughout the whole of the exercise. Now, we only ever consider fats as an energy source during submaximal or maximal intensity exercises when our glycogen stores start to deplete. Fats power all exercises, and this is known as fat combustion. When our glycogen levels have started to deplete after about an hour, fat oxidation kicks in. Fat oxidation is the process where the stored fat is broken down into smaller parts. Once they break down, they release energy, and we use that energy to keep us going during aerobic exercises when our glycogen levels have started to deplete. Now, how can lactic acid inhibit energy production? Now, lactic acid production rises the acidity levels inside the body. We need enzymes to break down certain molecules to give us energy. Enzymes work best at pH 7, or neutral. A rise in acidity by lactic acid lowers the pH, and this means it inhibits the enzymes from doing their job, which is to produce energy. If OBLA, which is measured at 4 millimoles, takes place at a later time during our exercise, then we will fatigue later during our exercise, which is an advantage to all athletes. So as you can see, I've included a graph here. So the top one is trained and untrained for VO2 max, and the bottom one is just the speed of the treadmill. So the trained and untrained, as you can see, the untrained produces more lactate at a sooner time, and it starts to increase a lot. And the OBLA, which is measured at 4 millimoles, takes place at a sooner time. However, as you can see from the blue line from the top graph on the VO2 max graph, the OBLA starts to rise takes place at a later time. This shows that the onset blood lactate accumulation takes place at a later time and means you'll fatigue at a later time as well. So in the last half of the section of this presentation, I'll be going through the anaerobic adaptations. So we're going to start off with the CV and the respiratory system adaptations. We need to train anaerobically by doing sprints and maybe even some resistant training. This way we will directly make our heart adapt during the process of the physical activity. One way in which our heart adapts is by strengthening the wall of the heart and making it thicker, also known as cardiac hypertrophy. This adaptation will result in a larger contraction or just higher stroke volume and also a lower heart rate. This adaptation will also shorten the recovery time due to the waste products being expelled quickly. This is vital for not just a world-class centre back like me, but for all the players on the pitch, and that is because firstly it'll allow you to work at a higher intensity for a longer time scale, and secondly you'll require less recovery time. All these features could make the difference on the football field. I forgot to also mention that we'll also be able to delay fatigue due to having the capability to supply oxygen to the mitochondria quickly, and mitochondria will be able to produce us with more energy when it is in hold of oxygen. Here's the new neuromuscular system adaptations. So on the previous slide, we've mentioned the word hypertrophy, and hypertrophy was just the increase in the number of individual cells. However, hyperplasia is different to hypertrophy. Hyperplasia is the action of splitting of muscle cells, which stimulates muscle growth. As you keep training anaerobically, over time you'll produce more forceful contractions. These fibers can be made stronger by weight training or simply just doing sprints. If a centre-back wants to improve their sprints, they would also need to consider the ability at which their fast oxidative glycolytic fibers are working at. In order for them to be working to their maximum, they need to be able to fire a lot of impulses to target muscles at once. If this does take place, you'll have stronger muscle contractions, and again, you'll delay fatigue. To improve this aspect, it will require you to focus on explosive and power training. Now, if you did GCSE PE, you'll remember that power is a combination of strength and speed. Strength and speed training is required to be done in the same session in order to activate the desired types of contraction for your muscles. Another aspect, before any type of training or physical activity, we need to warm up. The process of warming up is important because it prepares us for high intensity parts during our sport and reduces the likelihood of injury. Another way in which we can decrease the likelihood of injury is by increasing the strength in our skeletal muscles. Increasing the strength of our skeletal muscles also increases tendon strength, and this is due to connective tendons slowly starting to adapt to meet increased demands, which also decreases injury. So in summary, tendon strength allows us to train harder and avoid injury. Proprioceptors. To train at our maximal effort, we must make sure the antagonist is in the antagonist pair is relaxing as much as possible. This ideally allows the agonist muscle to continue contracting. One way by doing this is resistance training, and resistance training is usually the best type of training to improve this factor. This is down to a type of inhibition called the nervous inhibition. Oh, God. During exercise, we sometimes have the agonist muscle being prevented from contracting anymore. That is due to the antagonist pair not relaxing in order to relax the agonist. The nervous inhibition will stop sending impulses to the antagonists and start sending it to the agonist, which ideally stops it contracting. Resistance training will decrease nervous inhibition. Nervous inhibition is a response from the CNS which prevents the overcontraction of the muscle when it's undergoing vigorous training that we are not used to handling. There is also a stretch receptor in our muscles called the MSF, which is also known as muscle spindle fiber, and this basically detects changes in length of the muscle and prevents overstretching. This is also known as the stretch reflex, and it is activated when the proprioceptors detect too much stretch/force on a tendon. This causes it to send feedback to the CNS via an afferent nerve fiber. All this improves performance for one reason: you reduce the likelihood of injury. Force generation. Again, to improve force generation, you would 100% need to work explosively. Muscles will increase in strength, more motor units will be activated, all of which result in a larger force. In football, centre backs are targeted to work explosively because they'll be facing quick attackers that act sharply to situations. So here is the slide on energy system adaptations. What happens to the anaerobic enzymes with regular anaerobic training? As you start to train anaerobically, the anaerobic system will gradually start changing. An increased level of ATP will take place, and an increase in the breakdown of glucose into pyruvic acid will also take place. These changes will mostly take place in the fast twitch muscle fibers, because when training anaerobically, you're using your fast twitch fibers. This factor is helpful for centre backs in football because when they are sprinting to catch an attacker, they are able to maintain intensity without slowing down halfway through the sprint, which maintains the pressure on the attacker and most likely forces them to make a mistake. Now, in order to work anaerobically for a set amount of time, you need sufficient PC and ATP stores. Your muscle cells need to be able to store PC. Storing PC will give you the ability to perform for short bursts and high intensity exercises. The higher stores of PC, the more often a centre back in football can perform short high intensity sprints. In order to increase PC stores, you'll need to consume carbs before physical activity. The more carbs you take in, the higher your PC stores. So what is lactic acid buffering and how can it affect performance during anaerobic activities? Lactic acid buffering is when your body produces lactic acid quicker than you can get rid of it. So, and a good way to improve this is by prevent this from happening is interval training. So, e.g., like for example, you do 400-meter intervals, which will help you get used to the lactic acid buildup. Then you'll manage to handle it better over time. And when OBLA occurs, our performance will start to deteriorate. Training consistently will delay the point at which OBLA starts to rise, which allows you to perform at a specific intensity for a set amount of time. Now we move on to the final slide of the presentation, which is the skeletal system adaptations. Now, the best way to increase bone density, strength and width is by doing weight-bearing exercises. Weight-bearing exercises specifically work on the bones and they force you to work against gravity. Examples can be walking, jogging and hiking. These exercises regenerate new tissue in the bones, which will increase the strength, density and width of it. This also means that you are less likely to injure yourself and allows you to cope with more strenuous exercises, which also prevents osteoporosis. Now, your range of movement will also start to increase. So by increasing your range of movement, you'll have to do flexibility training. For example, stretching will 110% improve your flexibility. This will be very useful for centre backs in football because it will allow them to reach out for a tackle and avoid muscle injuries when increasing their range of movement.